just going to jump straight into talking with the chat room today. What's happening, folks? Welcome to Hal Sparks Mega Worldwide, the greatest live stream in the history of live streams. I'm Hal Sparks, and I will Hal Sparks the rest of the evening. I will be Hal Sparksing, as you know Hal Sparks will and can do. Also, I am under the impression that apparently the new AI algorithm, and you would think it would be my friend being named Hal, is reaching out its giant digital hand and choking the shit out of my channel. So subscribe is what I'm saying. Otherwise, I'm not going to show up in your business. Because I say big boy words and I talk about big boy stuff, and they're not quite sure they want it to be a big boy site. So it's fine. It's totally fine. Right? Look, it's their channel. We are here by the grace of the interwebs. So I'm on Twitch. I'm on Facebook, where we'll I guess we technically would have to find another way to be on Blue Sky. I guess I could grab I guess I could embed the Twitch stream, something like that. I don't know. Either way, that's because there's no direct streaming to Blue Sky as of yet. But in the process of, doing my show, I'm definitely ice skating uphill, and I don't have any big financial backers buying me a bunch of views to take a plunger to the algorithm. Let's just put it that way. I'm not going any further than that. Hi, folks. Let me know where you are. By the way, one of the best things you can do, share videos from the channel and also commenting under the channel like, this was great. He's a crazy person. I don't like him. It doesn't matter what you say. And that's why we love trolls and maggots here, because the algorithm works in mysterious ways, and it really only cares about interaction, which is why I'm no longer on Shitter, because that's how these sites get monetized and built. Just letting you know, including the dump hole named Rumble, which is where we're going to go for our first little jaunt this afternoon. Tulsa, what's happening? Isn't that where, who was it? One of the big TV preachers from the 70s saw a 900-foot Jesus outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, that said, if you don't pay me, if I don't raise $1 million, I'm going to die. Oral Roberts. It was Oral Roberts. That's right. I remembered. Oral Roberts said he was driving his truck down the road and he saw a 900-foot Jesus that told him to raise $1 million. Now, I don't know if I would have slammed on the brakes myself. I would have, because you don't want to drive under, you don't want to upskirt the Lord. I'm against it. I'm just saying. Oral Roberts, I have to say, sounds like, it sounds like Jimmy Swaggart's Tinder handle, but that's another conversation for another time. We'll get there. I'm not worried at all. Yeah, 900-foot Jesus. So let's jump right in. You don't have to look very hard, ladies and gentlemen, if I may, and like, subscribe, give a thumbs up, support the show, etc., etc. Patreon.com/Hal Sparks if you're serious about actually persevering. If you have loved ones, family members that are going to need to make it through the next 4 years, and they're going to need somebody to be their guide who can fearlessly laugh in the face of the fates, that is I, Hal Sparks, the deep state, the Democratic establishment, and everything. I am everything Anna Kasparian hates, except trans people. I'm not trans, but I have long hair. That should be enough, right? All right. Anyways, I'll self-identify for a half a second, and then she can have a legit reason to hate me. Anyways, point being is that there is no shortage of stupid takes on what's happening in Syria. And let me tell you right now, Syria is a fucking blender right now. Anybody who tells you they know how it's going to shake down is talking out of their ass. And thank you, Francie. There are a bunch of people like, well, they're playing kind of chess, and first of all, it's on a giant chutes and ladders board where everything could just go, and then it's all on fire. And there's maybe they'll stabilize. Who knows? But the country could just cease to be a country. Literally, it could be Syria, a Syrian Damascus as a little chunk of something, and then the rest of the country could just be sliced up by Turkey and Iraq and Israel and stuff. That's a possibility. It's a very strong possibility before they ever get on their feet with an actual government. And there's no reason to honor the borders that exist for a myriad of reasons. That said, what happened to Emma Vigeland? I'm going to go with Kool-Aid poisoning. That's what gets most of them. You know what I mean? But I don't know what her current problem is. So I can't speak to it directly. But when I've seen her kind of get out over her skis or take a long walk on a morally short pier, that seems to be what it is. Can't say. She seems nice enough. Don't know her personally. Can't speak. Anyways, so let's jump in real quick. If you want a really stupid take that, by the way, lines up with a bunch of other stupid takes, it's Jimmy Dore. So Jimmy Dore, yeah. So American flag on a truck. Lady, clearly Jewish-looking lady, is all you need to know. We're keeping we're keeping a third. Beg your pardon, I was getting ahead of myself. We're keeping a third of Syria. That's what apparently the Biden administration, before we leave, they're announcing this, and they've sent this lady, Dana Stroll, who you do not know, out to announce it. Apparently, that was it. U.S. not giving up occupied Syrian territory with Richard Medhurst. I don't know who Richard Medhurst is, but I'm sure that he thinks a lot of things. Now, I happen to have looked at, I could see the Dana Stroll name. They should have just cut the lady out and moved her down so you couldn't see who she is. This is CSIS headquarters. This is the study on the Institute of Syria or something like that. Anyways, so I kind of was able to look her up beforehand. So let's see where this goes, because I don't think it's going to go anywhere good, because it's Jimmy. But what do you think it's going to be America bad, and especially Biden? Let's see.
Come see us doing live shows. We'll be.
Nope.
This is a ex-deputy assistant secretary of defense for the Middle East. Her name is Dana Stroll.
Okay, she's an ex-deputy assistant secretary of defense, ex-assistant SecDef, deputy assistant SecDef for the Middle East. December 2nd, this says. This is the post from Afshin Ratanzi. Yeah. This post came up December 2nd. This is, okay.
And here she is. She's going to tell you that the United States actually owns part of Syria.
You mean because of the blood price? Because they're controlling it as they, battlefield phraseology, meaning owning it, not we own it, but we have captured it away from ISIS or something. I'm sorry. I'm probably jumping to conclusions.
Listen to this. Watch this.
The United States still had compelling forms of leverage on the table to shape an outcome that was more conducive and protective of U.S. interests. And
she says the United States has leverage. You know what our leverage is? That we're illegally occupying their country.
Oh, by the way, Syria isn't a country right now at all. Like, if you're going to make this argument for the last couple of years, it's lame and ham-handed, but Syria isn't a functioning country right now. Even the rebels can't be called rebels anymore. You know why? Because you have to have something to rebel against. Once the government falls, you're not a rebel anymore, asshole. You own it. You might be a fraction force. You might be, a wannabe element of a newly formed governmental system, or I don't know what the fuck, a wing of a party of believers who think they want to take right? But you can't rebel, if there ain't nothing to rebel on.
Yep. That's what she calls leverage. They talk about it like it's a real estate deal in Manhattan. Here she goes. Watch this.
Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Hal, this seems like, he's jumping in on a secondarily, lacking context chunk of video that somebody put up that has maybe maybe a dog in the fight, particularly, and it's on shitter. So if you're still on shitter, you're suspect as far as your feelings about Jews in general, but certainly the United States. And I don't think most of the folks that are on Twitter these days make a distinction between the two. But do you think this is maybe partly missing the all right.
So the first one was the 1/3 of Syrian territory that was owned via the U.S. military.
That was owned. So this is our leverage, the three leverage points. The first one is 1/3 of Syria that is owned by the U.S. military.
Well, I got to say, there seems to be she seemed to be making a "wuh" sound before you cut it off. Does anybody else notice that there was a "wuh"?
We didn't buy it. We didn't purchase it in a land deal.
And Syria didn't have control over it. ISIS did. ISIS stole it, and we have responsibility for it until, well, we'll get to that in a minute.
We illegally invaded their country, illegally.
It's a double illegal. So that makes it legal, I guess?
Against international law, and are currently occupying it. You know that?
No. It's not illegal. If you are not doing anything, I mean, by international law, and this is why Israel can invade the Hezbollah areas of Lebanon without violating international laws, that if you let a foreign organization or a terrorist group take over a chunk of your country and you don't do anything to get rid of them, then that ain't your territory anymore. And that's what happened with ISIS. And that's why, by the way, the Kurds helped us broom them out, and the Russians liked them there, because they figured they could set them up and drop them again. They could basically broom them out later because we'd already weakened them in other areas, and we were the ones cutting off their funding and cutting off their shipments of arms. So if we just got out, which is what Trump did, well, we'll get to that in a minute, because I have a feeling that this is the part that stuck out to me. This little thing right here, this little blue bar that says October 13th, but it's very, very small. It also says 2019. That's why the guy wrote throwback up there, which is what Jimmy left that word off. Throwback. All right.
Thing that everybody screams about what Putin.
By the way, does anybody remember who was president in 2019? It had to be Obama or Joe Biden, right? Because honestly, the Congress was putting together a working group like this, and this is the kind of stuff they were coming up with, clearly.
Putin did in Ukraine, now he illegally invaded. We did the same thing to Syria, which is right next door to Ukraine.
No, because, sorry, what's right next door to Ukraine?
Currently occupying it. You know that thing that everybody screams about what Putin did in Ukraine, now he illegally invaded? We did the same thing to Syria, which is right next door to Ukraine.
Is it though? I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, I would go look at a map, but I would be mad at myself for even going through the motions. Right next door. It's not at all. Not even, not anywhere near. Maybe he corrects himself.
And she says, we own it. Do you hear the link?
Nope, doesn't correct it. Nope, he clearly thinks they border each other. But Hal, could it get dumber? I'm guessing it can.
Which these people use? That's called imperialism.
Yeah, but we don't intend on keeping it. Trump wants to keep stuff. Remember, he's the one saying we got to keep the oil and stuff. But America just wanted to broom out ISIS. And then, depending on your feelings about Assad, if they end up toppling, which is indeed what happened, the Kurds would have their own territory protected from the Turks. But unfortunately, Donald Trump decided he needed to let Russia and their ally wipe them out.
Called hegemony. That's called chauvinism. Western show. It's every unbelievable thing. They just say it. It just rolls right off her tongue.
That's because she's not ashamed of it, because own doesn't mean the same thing. Like, we don't own the property. We own it because we've captured it back from ISIS that had control over it. She's using that terminology. That's where that comes from. Fuck me. All right.
We own a third of it. Here, let's listen to it again. Here we go.
Yeah, we know she used the word. The word means other things.
The states still had compelling forms of leverage on the table
Compelling
to
forms
shape
of
an
leverage.
outcome that was more conducive and protective of U.S. interests. And we identified 4. So the first one was the 1/3 of Syrian territory that was owned via the U.S. military with its local partner, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, this.
What? So we co-own it? What is it? Do we have a lease with an option to buy from our Syrian Democratic partners? Do you see how own doesn't mean what he says it means? We control it is what they mean. We have control over it. But the thing is, in an area where there are civilians, you don't control the civilian life. You own the responsibility for that area. And they own it in cooperation with their Syrian Democratic partners. Run that by me again.
And we identified 4. So the first one was the 1/3 of Syrian territory that was owned via the U.S. military with its local partner, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, this was a light footprint on the U.S. military.
Do you see how these people talk?
Yes, and I see how you have shit in your ears. A light military footprint. The ownership means defending the area. Now, look. In some cases, people like, in behind the microphone in this situation, sometimes they know that and they lie specifically. In this case, I'm guessing largely that that Jimmy has his dum-dum blinders on, that he just can't or doesn't know what that means in this context, that owning it, it's like saying theater of war and you're like, this proves it's all fake. They call it the theater of war. There aren't even bombs being dropped. I'm not even sure these countries even exist. You ever seen somebody who does conspiracy theories talk about that shit that way, where they're like, that's why they call it the theater of war, because it's all play acting. There are, it's all crisis actors. It's rubber bullets. Those aren't even real explosions. Like, it's that kind of nutty dumb.
Mafia.
That is exactly how the mafia talks.
No, it isn't. They even say they control certain corners, certain blocks. They use the word control more often.
The United States is a mafia state.
No, it's not. And also, this is 2019.
That's exactly how the mafia talks.
Yeah, I think, which mafia are we talking about? Are we talking about like the Chinese mafia, like the triad, or the Italian mafia, or the Russian mafia? The Russian mob, I gotta say, they don't do a lot of talking. They just, do a lot of spraying and pushing and shooting.
We own it. Hey, look. Hey, what's all our oil doing?
Own meaning we're responsible for it.
Doing underneath your land.
By the way, that's the way Trump talks, and Jimmy's up Trump's ass. Like, he is one of Trump's favorite suppositories. He's the French tickler of Trump asshole suppositories.
Huh? It's a pity if something would happen. You got a nice country you got there. Be pity if something happened to it, huh? Guess what?
No, you don't. Syria's not a nice country, especially since the Assad regime has controlled it. It sucks. Well, we'll continue, because I've actually watched her speech, her conversation.
We own it now. No, we own it.
I don't know how long this clip is, though, that he's playing, so I'm curious how far it goes.
And here's my offer. Nothing.
Well, then why would they partner with the Syrian Democratic Forces if they're offering nothing? What are the Syrian Democratic Forces, which, by the way, outnumber the U.S. military in that? Never mind.
Sounds just like the Godfather, because that's what it is.
No, it isn't, and you're stupid.
We're not there enforcing any rules-based order.
Yeah, we are, in partnership with the Syrian Democratic Forces, trying to drive out ISIS because they were wholesale slaughtering people.
We're not there providing democracy. We're not there.
Has anyone told the Syrian Democratic Forces this? It might come as a shock to them. Since they own more of it than we do, I guess. So we're like a junior partner.
Defending people from a dictator.
Well, I mean, so you don't think Assad is a dictator, or was, I guess?
We're the mafia coming in and stealing shit.
Then why didn't we take the oil for ourselves? For real. Why do we let them sell it on the open market? Why don't we just, back some fucking ships up and start, lay down a quick and dirty pipe because we don't care about the environment and just run it straight out to the fucking water and just fill the U.S. strategic reserves? If that's the case, why the fuck not? Oh, because we're not.
Let's listen to a little more.
About 1,000 troops over the course of the Syria Study Group's report, and then the tens of thousands of forces, both Kurdish and Arab, under the Syrian Democratic Forces. And that 1/3 of Syria is the resource-rich, it's the economic powerhouse of Syria. So where the hydrocarbons are, which...
Oh, and so the part of Syria that the U.S. military owns...
You guys, I don't even have to tell you this at this point, right? Like, it's, motherfucker. Does he have like a part of his brain that doesn't allow him to hear certain sentences? He only hears the stuff that excites him or proves his point, and the rest of it just turns into like Charlie Brown's teacher, just right? He just can't hear it, and the rest of us hear it, and we're like, you did this. I don't know. Maybe he was classmates with Bongholio.
Turns out to be the economic powerhouse. That's where all the hydrocarbons, she calls them, that means oil and gas. That's where it is. And then that's also where they make all their food. That's the rich farmland, the wheat.
Not quite, but the hydrocarbon part totally is true. And that's why ISIS took it. That's why Turkey wants to drive the Kurds out, because the Kurds believe that they have a right to that land. They believe that that is Kurdistan. So that's why the Turks want them out. You know why? Because Turkey wants access to that shit. And Trump helped them get some of it.
That's the part we took over.
So that it could be preserved for the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Kurds and the Arabs of the area, so that, God willing, if Assad falls, they have something that, a value to bring to the international table that isn't just Damascus as a city center.
Richard, go ahead. Say what you'd like.
Yeah, it's just shocking, and to that point about them being a mafia, I always call NATO a protection racket, right? It's exactly like the mafia. It's
a strategic military alliance. I mean, the racket part, I suppose you have an issue with. What's CSTO then? That's the Russian version of NATO that you have to join at the end of a barrel of a gun. People can choose to join this racket that is NATO or not. They're allowed to pick whether they want to join or not. They're not forced to do it. CSTO, on the other hand,
it'd be a shame if someone did something to your...
Yeah, he already did that joke. We know that one. It's the same one Glenn Beck does, and everybody's half-assed doing the military-based sketch with the Italians from Monty Python.
Country, right? So you better sign up to our program and pay us to protect you from us.
Sorry, I missed the part where Syria was offered the ability to join NATO, or we'd attack them. What?
And we shouldn't forget Turkey's a NATO country, right? So
The worst one, actually.
So when we say NATO-backed revolution, you got 2 NATO armies in Syria right now, U.S. and Turkey, in addition to Israel. And that region she's talking about.
Israel's not a NATO country, by the way.
And when I mentioned earlier the 1/3 of Syria, it's everything that's to the north and to the east of the Euphrates River, right? Remember, this is the Fertile Crescent. This is the cradle of civilization. This is where farming was invented, right? So
no, planting shit and knowing stuff grew out of the ground happened in like 19 fucking places.
So that's how fertile we're talking. That's how important.
Yeah, that's what happens when you have oral traditions for a long time before we realize other people were taking notes too. It's kind of like when we call what happened in Europe the Dark Ages, and China was flourishing at the time. You're like, I don't know if it was Dark Ages. It's sort of, it's kind of like where it rains in one area and it's not in the other. When you're a little kid, you think the world is being rained on, and then you're like, oh shit, it stopped raining. No, look back, it's still raining behind us on the road. Oh, that's fucking weird. Remember that thought when you had it? All right, yeah.
And Syria was a net exporter of wheat. So Syria had a surplus of wheat before the war. Bread was extraordinarily
before the war, 13 years ago.
Cheap.
Bread is cheap. That's why in one form or another, it is the essence of the caloric intake of almost everyone.
People ate well. So I'm not going to say the country was perfect, but
really, why not? What would you say is your primary? Besides the death camps and the torture chambers and the killing room at the whatever is it, the White Building at the, hold on, I got to look this up now. Shit. The Syrian prison at Sednaya that they just liberated, and they're like having to bust through the fucking floor to get prisoners out of there because they've been tormented for so long. Where is it? Al Sednaya, that's what it is. Yeah, this shit. Well, get over here. This business, Al Sednaya.
It was getting better and better.
Oh, yeah, totally. You're right. It was totally getting better and better. Hold on. Right? Where's this? There we go. I'm going to stretch this out so I can show it to you. Sometimes these little window menus annoy me because you have to be right on it for it to, can we ballpark this shit? Okay, that's Sednaya. The red building is where everybody was tortured. The white building is where they killed everyone. Now, I don't know why you'd separate those two. I guess the idea is that if you're in the red building, you at least think you might make it. So you might be, if they move you to the white building and people get killed there, you just go down with a ship. You're like, you're going to kill me anyway, so I'm not going to tell you shit, right? So, yeah. And then this is currently what's happening in Sednaya. There you go.
They walked for kilometers. Pain from years of waiting etched in their faces.
Yeah, we're not saying it was a perfect country. Come on. What's your standard here?
Syrians from across the country are converging on the most notorious prison controlled by a regime which has now collapsed.
Yeah, but what's collapsed?
They're searching for loved ones who disappeared years and sometimes decades ago.
My brother was detained in 2014, and it was very hard to know where they took him at first. Then I found out he was in Sednaya. He wasn't accused of anything.
It's a story we heard.
Literally, these people are walking, after the government fell, are walking to this fucking prison. They let out some of the people that were on the first floor, the kind of low-hanging fruit of it. But they, let me see if I can speed forward to what they're doing. They're going through lists of people that they found in the records that, to find out who's alive and who's dead and all this shit. And then they're just they got these workers in there busting holes in the fucking floor because people are being held underground in these fucking dungeon areas. They literally have miner's caps on, because they're digging down under the fucking building to get these folks out. Is anybody really? It's not perfect. Okay, nobody says it's a perfect. I'm not saying it's a perfect country, but they are digging under the prison for live people who are kept in windowless underground cells and sealed in, apparently. The very definition, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching House Sparks Mega Worldwide, of imperfect.
You know, the infrastructure was being modernized the whole time.
Yes, it certainly was. They were reinforcing the foundation of the prison for quite some time.
New pavements the whole pavement's being redone, roads being built.
Absolutely, especially the ones to the prison sites.
Tunnels being, you know, highway tunnels being dug. Internet getting faster, no more electricity cuts. I saw that with my own eyes, right?
So you stayed close to where Assad's family was, is what you're saying? You were in the main areas. You didn't venture out into the ISIS-controlled areas or the Turkish-controlled areas or the Kurdish-controlled areas, I'm guessing, or where the Yazidis were.
Every single year was getting better and better, and then 2011 just set the country back, like, you know, decades. Now you get
fucking 2011. Am I right? Obama.
A few hours of electricity in Damascus. So, and you got sanctions. I mean, they destroyed the country, and all this area they're occupying, Hasake Deir ez-Zor, these are the governorates in that 1/3 of Syria. Has got all the oil there, and they put U.S. military bases on the oil fields, right, to really make you understand who owns it.
Yeah, because they have to defend them so that when the Syrian Democratic Forces take over, in theory, of that area, they have something to do. Otherwise, I mean, again, what do you do? What are you defending for them? Because the oil fields are out in the middle of nowhere. The cities, they can kind of defend themselves. All right.
They put U.S. bases with U.S. flags, and they do patrols and just steal
So do the Russians.
the oil, and then they ship it
No, we don't steal the oil.
into Iraq, so they can more securely, you know, evacuate the oil from their American bases in
Yeah, what are they doing? Helicopters?
Iraq.
That's how they're doing it. So they're trucking the oil. Jesus. They're trucking the oil into Iraq.
And you know, if you look at the companies that were extracting that oil, also based in Delaware, owned by a bunch of neocons, and just, you know, Syria. If you look at the top 10
Sorry, which neocon oil extraction? You mean Exxon?
exporters of oil in the world, Syria's not on that list. It's not like Iraq or Iran. It doesn't have that much oil, but what it represents to the Syrian economy is 1/4. So oil revenue is 1/4 of.
Right, and having ISIS seize that and sell it and use that that revenue to buy arms so they can kill more Syrians seems counterproductive. This guy is I guess, Richard Medhurst. I don't know. They don't introduce him at the top of the clip, but he seems like he reminds me a lot of the tanky types we see in China talking about all the airports and the train stations, and they're like, look at how awesome this is, where they tucker their way around the country and point to big infrastructure projects and go, this is awesome. Look how shiny and new, and they're kicking ass, and America doesn't do anything like this. And then you go a block and a half away and people are swilling like cooking oil out of the sewer.
Of the government's revenue. That's how big and how important it was. And Syria, as a socialist country, you know, you got free education, you got free healthcare. Mm-hmm. All of that is subsidized by the government. So by stealing the oil and stealing the crops, you're directly depriving Syria of that revenue.
Well, Alawites and the ruling Arabs, not Syria in general. It might shock people to find out that education stuff and that healthcare stuff doesn't really make its way to the mountains.
And the Syrian people of you know, their human.
It's like 3 fucking cities.
Rights and their standard of living. So, you know, Syria also was growing lentils, cotton, you name it. All right. So a lot of it was very.
Spaghetti trees? Do they have spaghetti? You said name it.
Self-sufficient in a lot of ways, and you know, you can see what Gaddafi did with his country. How stable it was. He made it the most successful country in Africa, the richest. And again,
which not suspect at all, considering the level of output.
You can't deny that there was improvement in the country. You can't deny it. And
like I said, I think these people would let's just say agree to disagree.
And these people want to deny it so they can justify putting nut jobs and head choppers from Al-Qaeda in power. Well, I'm sorry, but you.
Yeah, head choppers from Al Qaeda in power. That's what they're talking about, the rebels that have just taken over. I don't know where the fuck this guy is. I mean, I guess the theory is that where he's in Homs or something like that. Is he still in country, or he's just in a nearby country? It doesn't say live from. That's why I try and put on when Phil is with us, like live from Kyiv or Ukraine when I talk about it, because it's kind of important to know.
You know, you can't do.
It's like when Glenn Beck said he was in fucking Afghanistan and he was really like in a nice hotel in Abu Dhabi.
Me, I was there. I saw it.
Was Qatar.
And the country was getting better. And now they talk about it like it's a piece of real estate. It's disgusting, honestly.
And just to remind people before we wrecked Libya, that Gaddafi had same thing. Everybody had education. Everybody had healthcare. Everybody had housing.
Totally. I mean, it was amazing. It was like a glowing utopia. Why didn't you move there, Jimmy?
They had a good economy. In fact, he even turned the desert into farmland, which with a waterway system that was considered the eighth wonder of the world. Gaddafi did that. And then what?
After what? I think the Chinese would disagree, because every thing they have built in the last 25 years, they consider there's like 17 of them the eighth wonder of the world. Also gibberish.
We bombed it with depleted uranium bombs. And so we wrecked it.
Yeah, why didn't we use real uranium? Why did we wait till it was depleted? I don't think we were committed.
Just like we wrecked Syria.
We did? I think the head chopping Al Qaeda guys would like a word, because they want credit for it.
Just like we wrecked Iraq.
Yeah, Iraq is Iraq right now. It was so much better when Saddam was running things.
Just like we're going to try to wreck Iran.
Are we? I mean, again, what's the definition of try to wreck?
So
why wouldn't we be able to do it? I mean, if we're committed to taking the resources of these countries, and we're a totally imperialist country, and that's all we do, why would we try? Wouldn't we just do it, right? Is there a reason we're handing these territories back over to people? What the fuck?
So, this is your country. This is, and nobody, do you remember voting for us to go to war with Syria? Because we didn't. They're doing all this.
No.
Yeah, Syria didn't control that area when we went in at all. It was perceived as part of the ISIS caliphate. That was kind of the point, and they were going to bleed across.
Under what's called the AUMF, which is after 9/11, the Congress passed an authorization for the use of military force, and that was so the president could go find the people who did 9/11, no matter where they were in the world. So they could be anywhere. They could be in Afghanistan, they could be in Iraq, they could be in Libya, they could be in Syria, they could be in Somalia, they could be in the Sudan. Wherever they are, the United States is bombing under the AUMF as if we're fighting the people who did 9/11. Syria had nothing to do with 9/11, but
But the area that we were in was controlled by Al Qaeda and then ISIS, and this is so stupid.
Using that same authorization to invade illegally, occupy, and wreck a country. Same thing.
How do you wreck it? It's already wrecked. That area was already claimed as part of the caliphate. The Syrians themselves couldn't take control of it. And when it was freed, it was not taken over by the Syrian army. It was taken over by the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Kurds and the people who actually are indigenous to the area that had been put down by the Syrian government for a long time. I'm starting to think that the Middle East in and of itself is kind of a murky gray zone of interests.
We're doing that everywhere. That's what they're
No, we're not.
using.
Yeah.
And so so Congress never has to vote to go to war. A president never has to declare a war.
Well, sure they do. If we're declaring war against a particular country, and we can enter with the permission of the country or with it as a part of a collaborative effort, because somebody doesn't have to let us in to do it if it bleeds over from Iraq and you can't even tell where the border starts, which is how a lot of that shit's happened, the same way the Russians got in.
We could just have endless wars. And this is what Trump, when he ran in 2016, was to stop this stuff.
Then why is that lady talking in 2019?
Trump ran to stop this stuff.
No, he did not. He ran.
He said we need to get out of the Middle East.
He said we should keep the oil.
Let people take care of their own countries. And that's why.
Where's that quote? We should get out of the Middle East and let people take care of their own countries. Please show that clip.
This war machine did Russiagate on Donald Trump because he ran as an anti-interventionist. He exposed them, their game. And for all of Donald Trump's flaws, which he has many.
Do you really believe that, though? I would offer an example. Otherwise, most of us just think, again, that you've burrowed up his ass and you find it comfy.
That's why they hated him. If you listen to CNN, they'll tell you they hate Donald Trump because...
Okay, is he playing any more of this lady? I guess he is. Hold on. Okay.
He's in Washington. We're there, United States of Syria. That's what. Get
care.
this occupation, and now there's no government there anymore. Let me get her. No one's going to say what. When did you buy it? Why do you get to own it?
Okay, yeah, he's still stuck on the word own.
Is there a UN resolution saying you own it? No, quite the opposite.
There's a UN resolution saying America does not own a third of Syria.
That's an illegal invasion. It's a legal occupation.
No, it isn't, because we're not occupying it.
And now there's no government there anymore.
Well, then I guess you can't violate the territorial integrity of a country that doesn't exist. Sounds like Syria is more of a nickname these days.
Let me just show you this. So now, get this. This is the new headline, Richard. I don't know if it says U.S. after the United States got in bed with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, legit, to overthrow. The person running Syria is now the head of Al-Qaeda.
No, he isn't. No. He was put in place by al-Baghdadi to run ISIS there, the al-Nusra Front, and he thought ISIS was too extreme, especially as they continued on. So he sided with al-Qaeda and did a breakaway. Then then his organization broke away from al-Qaeda and wanted to be a moderating force in the area and work with the Syrian Democratic Forces. And this is over the course of like 12 fucking years. He's not the head of al-Qaeda.
U.S. pounds ISIS camp in Syria after Assad flees.
They pounded the fleas first?
I find that hard to believe.
This is not, I don't believe this either.
Why?
It says there should be no doubt we will not allow ISIS to reconstitute. A top general said. Well, let me just read you a few paragraphs from this story from Political.
Okay, first, fuck that. He's just going to wrap this up. This is the lady he was talking about. This is from October 31st, 2019. This is the actual thing that he was playing, that somebody posted a clip of, and he bounced this whole shit off of that. And this is I'm fairly certain I have this teed up right. That
approached.
Yeah, that they did. So this is about the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and they're talking about Syria and the gray zone, and they're talking about the murky aspects of what's going on there and how it's stabilized. And if anybody remembers, this is right after Trump gave 2 of our bases to Russia, backed out of there, and let the Kurds get slaughtered. Remember that? Okay, so they did this whole working group for the Congress. The Congress put this thing together and said, we need a working group to figure out what the fuck is going on in Syria. There's another one happening right now because they're just gathering intel and trying to make sense of it and I'm not even sure you can right now. So check this out. This is what her whole remarks.
Strategy, or is it more at the tactical level?
Well, in the case of Iran, certainly the Iranians have shown themselves adaptable to the local context. So what they're doing, for example, in the Deir ez-Zor area is different from how they've approached communities in southern Syria, which is different from how they've approached communities in the suburbs of Damascus. Different communities need different things, have experienced different levels of conflict.
This is where the Iranians are trying to gain control of certain areas and undermine. Hold on, let me see if I can bring this up as well, because it's kind of crucial. Yeah, I'll just grab it on here. So the long and short of it is, Yeah. So, see if I got this. And then, whoops. Okay, yeah. So this is about Idlib. Hold on. Agree. All right. So just so you know, I'm gonna open this up and here, just to catch people up on shit. So, Iran is Shia. So, Shia Islam is the official state religion and the dominant sect of Islam in Iran. Iran has the largest Shia majority in the world, which is about 90% of the population identifying that way. Now, you can't not, so you probably keep it to yourself, even if you believe otherwise. It's that kind of situation. Meanwhile, the Saudis are Sunni, as are most of the controlling people in Syria. So their largest group is Sunni. And so Iran, in trying to undermine the government there and undermine the control structure there, is trying to move in with Shia forces. That includes Al Qaeda and ISIS and the like, and undermine the Sunni countries. They're doing this in multiple countries. This is where the spread of effectively post 9/11 terrorist link groups came from, was this kind of Shias taking a more active, violent role back, against Sunni. And this has a lot to do, I suppose, with it would seem that the Saudi royal family has control over the two biggest sites in Islam, and you've got to do what they say to have access to it and the like. And so to make the pilgrimage that you must make, you have to kowtow to the Sunnis, which I'm sure they don't like. So don't appreciate.
As it relates to the broader conflict, and so the Iranians are adaptable.
Yeah.
What do you feel?
No, I think it's a good question, and I don't know that we know the answer.
Yeah.
It's easy to.
Maybe this is
what
early.
it's doing in Syria is entirely in the gray zone. Two great examples are Russia through its Security Council seat at the UN Security Council.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'll back up.
I was the director for several Middle Eastern countries. The Syria.
Since we're talking about Russia and Iran and gray zone activities, one question we worked to tackle in the deliberations of our group is about the alliance between Russia and Iran in Syria, and are there vulnerabilities or...
And by the way, you started to get a grasp on why they picked the clip that they did from this and not this stuff, and how even back in 2019 during Trump, they were talking about the alliance between Russia and Iran trying to undermine the Sunnis in the country, not just because Assad is an Alawite, he's not even Sunni, so they don't need to bump him out of the way, but the substructure, the deep state of Syria, if you will, is all Sunni.
Fractures or tensions
and all the people who fled
could be exploited by the United States to divide them and then move forward with a better outcome for Syria. And our conclusion...
Did you hear that?
...abilities or fractures or tensions that could be exploited by the United States
between Russia and Iran
to divide them and then move forward with a better outcome for Syria. And our conclusion was no.
Obviously, Syria is a 51st state.
Not at this time. That what unites Russia and Iran in their commitment to the survival of Assad regime and his commitment to retake Syrian territory.
How'd that work out?
Is much stronger than any of the tensions that are dividing the two entities at this point in time. Mm-hmm. In terms of gray zone activities, other than Russia's overt kinetic military support for the Assad regime, what it's doing in Syria is entirely in the gray zone. Two great examples are Russia, through its Security Council seat at the UN Security Council, consistently blocks efforts to have truth-telling commissions, fact-finding commissions on things, for example, like use of chemical weapons, commission of war crimes, etc. So.
Right. You're starting to get a picture, ladies and gentlemen, of our dear friends in 2019 in the age of early Tulsi Gabbard.
Russia.
Oh, could you explain Alawite? Yeah. So Alawites are like mystical form of Islam. Let's see if I can see if what's Alawites. Yeah, there we go. See something that's not too overly complicated. Alawites are here you go. I mean, it's there. Oh, shit, I gotta shrink this down a little bit. Are followers of Alawism. That might shock you, but they're an Arab minority religious group that live primarily in the Levant, which is, if you'll know that, like, ISIS was often called locally not just Daesh, which was a slang for them, but ISIL instead of ISIS, which was, you know, Islamic State in the Levant. Okay, that's the area around Syria and the northern areas surrounding that area, on top of and Iraq and stuff. This is the area we're talking about that they took over. That ISIL took over that area of Syria. Okay, that's the Levant, and follow the esoteric sect of Islam called Alawism, a religious sect that splintered from early Shia, which is why they think they can undermine the Sunni part of it and kind of align with them and just give them a sign off. The Alawites, Venerable Ali ibn Abi Talib, with the first imam in the Twelver school, was a physical manifestation of God. So they are much closer to sort of like Koresh or Jim Jones or somebody like that, or a cult that actually believes that their physical leader, their living person, is actually God, not God's prophet, which is what Muhammad would be, or the Son of God in the case of Jesus Christ, but he's actually God in the flesh, specifically. The group was founded by Ibn Nusayyr in the 9th century. He was a disciple of the Twelver Imam, and so Alawites are all called Nusayrists. And also, and there's a lot of the loopy language around this, around Syrian, Osiris, like you can see where the language mixes. Yes, it's very much a cult in that regard. Surveys suggest Alawites represent an important portion of the Syrian population, or a significant minority in the Hittite province of Turkey and northern Lebanon, which is, again, all of this overlapping kind of area in the control structure of Syria. There's also a population living in the village of Gajar in the Golan Heights, which Israel has now seized and is saying is permanently part of their territory. And there are two Alawite villages, Ain Fit and Zahura, before the Six-Day War, and then they formed the dominant religious group on the Syrian coast and towns near the coast. Again, they ended up with the money, and which is also inhabited by Sunnis, Christians, and Ismailis. There's I think Syria's 10% Christian. There's more of a mix there. Again, one of the things that there's a bunch of Islamic and Abrahamic minorities through a bunch of these areas that formed alliances against the Shia encroachment. Okay, so the Shias are more the Sunnis were the ones that were branching out. When you hear stories of the Sunnis sitting down with someone and they meet someone from Europe and show them algebra and they're like, look, we have this deep abiding history, and they can argue philosophy with you and there's no blades drawn. That would be the Sunni side of things in a lot of ways. And the Shia, on the other hand, took another path. And so a lot of them, the Sunnis, the Christians, the Ismailis, and the Alawites, kind of in the Syrian areas and in the Golan Heights and near Israel, which was, again, one of the reasons it was called Palestine, was because it was a nondescript area. There are no Palestinians, as it were. Nobody's ethnically Palestinian in that regard that can't be also Jewish, also Arab, right? They're not, it's not the superseding thing. It's a description of the area, right? Yes, it'll be on the test. But the point being is that they all group together in that part of the area, and the Iranians have been trying to reclaim big chunks of that back over time. Okay, so that's kind of if that helps. The Alawites are think of them as the Mormons of Shia Islam, except they don't recruit.
Consistently at the UN Security Council and in deliberations across UN bodies like the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, will block block international bodies from undertaking those fact-finding missions, block international bodies from assigning complicity for the commission of war crimes, for the use.
See, isn't it funny how this isn't the part that Jimmy jumped on with that other dickhead? Isn't that curious to anybody?
Use of chemical weapons. So it's basically, no, this didn't happen, look over there, somewhere else.
Yeah, it's like, think of it as Russia is for Syria what Jim Jordan is to OSU and sexual assault.
Another great example of Russian operations in the gray zone are its use of mercenaries, like the Wagner.
Wagner. They take their name from Hitler's favorite composer. Get it straight. They're not big fans of Robert Wagner. It's the Wagner Group.
Organization. So basically, rather than have Russian military forces itself challenge us, there was a time where U.S. military forces at our outpost of the Tomsk garrison were challenged not by the Russians themselves, but by mercenaries, Wagner operating alongside Iran proxies. So these are examples where the Russians maintain just enough distance to be able to deny, but it's clearly different elements of the Russian state challenging and testing the United States, both our commitment, our resolve, and then actually what we're doing in Syria and where we're willing to draw that line. And Iran is all about gray zone activities, not just in Syria, across the region. Mike, I'll leave it to you to talk more about Iran.
Hold on one second. Let's see if she continues on with this. And then I think there's
have come out of Washington in a rather unplanned manner about whether or not the U.S. military is staying. Mike and I have argued recently that the other forms of leverage remain compelling if resourced effectively.
Okay, so this is where they got it from. And this is right after Trump pulled our people out. That's what she's referencing. Stuff happening in she even, I think, even references at one point, a house of a certain color.
Effectively and prioritized at the highest levels of the U.S. government. So if we're going to hold the line on the diplomatic isolation, on moving forward with the economic sanctions architecture, and holding the line on reconstruction aid, perhaps those things could still be compelling, because in our view, what our assessment was that the conflict has not changed. The conflict is not over. It's entering a new phase. ISIS is certainly not defeated, no matter what you hear from certain houses of a certain color here.
Right. I totally defeated ISIS. That's what she's talking about.
D.C. The Russians very much remain committed to Bashar.
Thanks, McNally. Glad to do it.
Al-Assad, as do the Iranians. Refugees are not returning home, certainly not in a safe, voluntary, or dignified manner.
Isn't it weird how Jimmy just kind of leaves off this part with his other dickhead he was talking to? They just kind of avoid this part of the conversation. And the fact that this conversation is about Syria in the gray zone, meaning that there are a lot of competing interests. There's no black and white here. There's a lot of, flip-flopping control points. It is hard to work out. If you're trying to be on the side of good in the area, what that means and what level that's in. And if you pull out of there entirely, you leave anybody who might be good at all to the effect of the worst in the area, if not the second worst or the third worst.
And international norms are still being smashed every day by the civilian protection issues taking place in Syria.
Great. Mike, we're going to go to you, and then a brief round.
Okay, and then I want to say she had this other, go back to her. So this was before. It might have been at the top of her last piece. Let me see this.
Last month's decisions and developments. We argued in our recommendation section that taken as a whole, even though the United States said there's limited appetite domestically here or on the Hill to match the level of resources or even diplomatic investment of the Iranians and the Russians in Syria, that the United States still had compelling forms of leverage on the table.
Okay, there it is. So they cut off the top of this entirely. Listen to what she's talking about. She's talking about our being there, and is our appetite to help these folks as strong as Iran and Russia's appetite to take the fucking place over, basically, and use the Assad regime as a sock puppet.
It states that there's limited appetite domestically here or on the Hill to match the level of resources or even diplomatic investment of the Iranians and the Russians.
Right. There's very limited appetite here to match the level of input from Iran and Russia together in the area. They are more committed than we are to monkeying around in Syria.
Syria, that the United States still had compelling forms of leverage on the table to shape an outcome that was more conducive and protective of U.S. interests. And we identified 4. So the first one was the 1/3 of Syrian territory.
Oh, by the way, when she says are protective of U.S. interests, the whole point of this report is, are there any U.S. interests? If there are, how do we maximize them? That's what the report is. So to the exclusion of the interests of everyone else, if we're going to be there, why? Right? What's in it for us to continue doing this, or what can we benefit, in terms of our allies, protecting them, whatever. If we're going to be there at all, is there something? And she's saying yes. If they didn't find anything, the answer would be, we didn't find any. There is no strategic importance to us controlling this area. We're not going to be able to push it in one direction or another. We can't protect these people forever, so we can't protect them at all. And it's probably best for us to get out of this area and cede that territory in some ways, not have a base there, not have our troops in harm's way, have them in Iraq or something like that, so it doesn't spill over into areas where we do have interest. Gotcha? Okay.
Territory that was owned via the U.S. military with its local partner, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, this was a light footprint on the U.S. military, only about 1,000 troops over the course of the Syria Study Group's report. And then during
the report, and again, this goes to that whole Ed Kemper thing that I talked to you guys about. Like, it seems to me everything you've learned about serial killers comes from the ones you've been able to catch. Okay, everything she's talking about is only from and regard to a report written about the strategic interests of the United States, if they exist, why they exist, and what we can do to maximize them. Not the rest of the U.S.'s interests, or whether or not Syria, is in our, has other partnerships that can handle it. Okay.
Tens of thousands of forces, both Kurdish and Arab, under the Syrian Democratic Forces. And
10,000. Well, we have 900 people there. They have tens of thousands.
That 1/3 of Syria is the resource-rich, it's the economic powerhouse of Syria. So where the hydrocarbons are, which obviously is very much in the public debate here in Washington these days, as well as
because Trump was saying we should keep the oil.
The agricultural powerhouse. But we argued that it wasn't just about this 1/3 of Syrian territory that the U.S. military and our military presence owned, both to fight ISIS and also as leverage for affecting the overall political process for the broader Syrian conflict.
You see that? Owned for fighting ISIS and affecting the overall conflict in Syria, meaning the civil war that had been going on for a long time.
There were 3 other areas of leverage. One is political and diplomatic isolation of the Assad regime. This is, in our assessment, one of Russia's goals in the Middle East, is the propaganda win for Russia of rehabilitating Assad on the international stage.
And fast forward to now, not exactly how it worked out.
Stage of basically forcing the international community to normalize him and welcome him back in without any behavioral changes.
Didn't work out.
So holding the
again, this is in 2019.
Line on diplomatic isolation, preventing embassies from going back into Damascus. 2 is the economic sanctions architecture. So some of this is part of the maximum pressure campaign of the Trump administration on Iran, but there's a whole suite of both executive and congressional sanctions on Syria and Bashar al-Assad, both for human rights abuses in Syria and to the backers of Assad for their activities in support of him in Syria. And 3 was reconstruction aid. So the United States remains the overall largest single donor of humanitarian aid to Syrians both inside Syria and refugees outside of Syria.
Now, why is it that Jimmy didn't play that part? Why wasn't that the part he pulled?
Of humanitarian aid.
Hold on, let me back it up even further.
So the United States remains the overall largest single donor of humanitarian aid to Syrians both inside Syria and refugees outside of Syria. And there was some stabilization assistance in the part of Syria that was liberated from ISIS and controlled via the Syrian Democratic Forces in northern eastern Syria.
See, controlled versus owned. Again, owned is responsibility, controlled is militaristic. We can say that about them. We can't say it about us because we're not there to control it. We own the responsibility, good and bad, for what happens in that territory.
The rest of Syria, though, is rubble. And what the Russians want and what Assad wants is economic reconstruction. And that is something that the United States can basically hold a card on via the international financial institutions and our cooperation with the Europeans. So we argued that absent behavioral changes by the Assad regime, we should hold the line on preventing reconstruction aid and technical expertise from going.
And that would be, just to clarify, if we're going to give you money to rebuild, bus and train stations and sewer treatment plants and energy parts of your grid, we're not going to do it while you're building shit like this. This, again, is the Sednaya prison. If you've got money for this, you don't need our money to build railroad tracks and stations. Does that make sense? Chat room, you get me? You feeling me? I know there's a delay in it or whatever, but just kind of important there. But do you think it's odd at all that Jimmy didn't point out the fact that the U.S. is it makes our biggest investment, by the way, not just in terms of our military, what we have there, but the most money we put into Syria is helping refugees both inside and outside the country and people who are displaced, especially in that part of the country, through, by the way, these Syrian democratic forces. That's been ongoing. It's also why these guys eventually were able to live long enough to make their way to Aleppo.
Back into Syria. So now, in the past month, it looked like one of the most compelling forms of leverage, which was the U.S. military presence, was taken off the table quite fast.
That's when Trump pulled the people out. That's what she's talking about.
Now, as of this morning, the news suggests that maybe that military presence will stay for some period of time.
Yeah, turned out he was bullshitting largely.
And the problem with this is
and he just gave 2 bases to Russia, by the way, both of which were used to transport arms to Hezbollah during their attacks on Israel. So, Mr. Trump, I'm the best friend Israel ever had. Just
no matter what the U.S. military presence is or isn't, at this point, a lot of the PR damage is done. So if you're trying to get allies.
And this goes into whether or not people trust us again and all that shit. So I feel like that wraps that conversation up and you guys get the picture. But it is in the conversation about Syria and all this stuff and what Jimmy is pushing and I don't know, his fucking guest or whatever. Let me try and make it as simple as I can. It's Russian propaganda. America bad because they fucked Russia's plan in Syria. We were always there fucking with Russia's plan because destabilization and giving it to Iran was ultimately their plan. Assad's days were numbered. Eventually, he had already bought property in Moscow. His family was going to move there after the place fell to the Iranians. That was going to be the sacrificial part of it. Or they put somebody puppet, son of his in charge of it, but everybody would bug the fuck out. At some point in the next decade, it just all fell too quickly and they just went there anyways. So the primary thing is that this is about the strategic alliance between Russia and Iran, and they got fucked. That's why Jimmy's mad. That's why Jimmy's guest is talking the same shit we hear from all the tankies that are like, oh my God, the CCP is so amazing. Look at all the hospitals they built during COVID. And those are prisons. First of all, hospitals, unless you're talking about an insane asylum or a mental institution, who can tell the difference, don't have bars on the windows and don't have the food tray slot where you can slide the food on the floor. That's a jail. That is, if anything, that's a quarantine ward, but it's not a hospital. You get out if you survive. It's not about treatment. That's what they were building. And they built a lot of them. But these guys are like, look at the hospitals. And they just, because they see white walls going up and they're like, clap, clap, clap. And then as soon as they start putting the fucking doors on things, people are like, anyways, over here, same shit. Same shit. We need to be the world's EMT, not its police. We are. It just doesn't get as much attention because it doesn't make as much noise. We've been doing airdrops into Gaza of food and supplies almost the entire time, basically from October 12th. We are. Just nobody cares. It's not sexy. It's fucking boring compared to like when we shock and awe shit. So, for the record, just putting that out there.